I didn't play that many games from 2022 and 2023, so I thought instead of trying to force a top 10 list for last year, I'd just do my top 15 games of the past 2 years. By the way, there's a lot of games I haven't played, and these are just in alphabetical order, not numbered from my least favorite to my favorite.
Yo.
Bomb Rush Cyberpunk incorporates a lot of dumb shit, and that's what makes it so faithful to the games it's trying to emulate. It starts with the main character getting his head chopped off by a vinyl record, and then coming back to life. You earn street rep like it's tangible currency, and fight off cops with spray paint, and compete in skating competitions for control of the city. The combat is a little floaty and repetitive, and the story takes a drop in quality towards the end, but the pairing of great art direction and music with exciting and fluid gameplay makes BRC a pretty memorable experience. Sega casually announced at the Game Awards that they had new entries in the works for franchises left untouched since before I was even born, including Jet Set Radio, so fingers crossed there's another game just like this, if not even better, on the horizon. Cassette Beast is an indie game made by 3 people that stomps on a 30-year-old multi-billion-dollar franchise. The puzzles are actually fun. The combat, which also involves catching creatures and taming them, is far deeper and requires more skills than just leveling up to do more damage. And the map is open-ended, but unlocking all its secrets is a long and exciting process. And of course, the art style is fantastic. When I was first making this list, I actually completely forgot this game existed, but skimming through the long play, all the cool ideas and characters it had hit me like a truck. Its story also feels a little incomplete towards the end, but otherwise I was pleasantly surprised by how well this game was executed. I couldn't beat Elden Ring because I'm not actually that good at video games, but maybe one day. The brutal combat of From Software's Souls-like titles is an inconsistently flawed fit for this Zelda-like approach to open-world game design, where you want to feel proud of your own ideas and unrestricted by an external sense of linearity. Instead, a lot of the cool weapons and spells in this game that should reward experimentation are undermined by the fact that they range from being effectively useless to insanely overpowered, and it's very difficult to find the right build for your character without consulting a guide. Not to mention, this whole system of needing a certain soul level to even equip something is fucking stupid. However, there is an absurd level of detail and effort put into Elden Ring's world and character design. In fact, this game could have no combat and it would still probably make the list. My opinion on God of War Ragnarok shifted constantly throughout my entire playthrough. On the one hand, it struggles to present a voyage as thrilling, emotional, and consistent as the 2018 game, with so many new plot points and characters added to the equation. Instead of it being this beautiful, relatively linear journey carried by the developing relationship of its main characters, it's totally directionless and involves those two characters in contrasting situations. Still, it's filled with somber moments, interesting development of characters like Sif and Thrud, and some genuinely impressive puzzles, all complemented by super satisfying combat.
Let's do it!
I tried tricking myself into thinking High on Life was a bad game after looking back on how dumb and low effort the comedy was, but I just couldn't do it. I don't remember much of the humor in this game, to be honest, which is probably a good sign, but that wasn't even what captivated me. I was totally blown away by the level design and interesting mechanics and how those managed to work within the general structure of it all. Regardless, it's one of those pieces of entertainment where everything makes sense because nothing makes sense. It could have ended abruptly right in the middle of the story as the final joke, and I wouldn't bat an eye. The levels being segmented from one another was a slightly disappointing revelation, but other than that, it's a really solid action-adventure game disguised as like a stoner comedy.
KO!
KOF 15 is plagued by terrible online, unintuitive user interface, and a distinct lack of content. But I put enough hours into just replaying the arcade mode to say it's a pretty fun game. Pentiment is not the type of game that will appeal to everyone. It's barely a game, and it requires a lot of patience, which I don't always have. But it truly blew me away in its consistent characterization and storytelling, and more importantly, its approach to storytelling, even in its very surface-level ideas. You can click on some underlying terms in the speech bubbles, which will take you to a storybook with their definitions and important historical context. It's always nice to learn about actual real-world events instead of purely in-game lore, and the Renaissance is an absolutely wonderful setting. I haven't seen anyone mention this, probably because not everyone played George in the middle school production of it, but I feel like there's definitely some inspiration drawn from Thornton Wilder's Art Town. Many years pass in between each of its 3 acts, and this demonstrates the growth of not only the town and society, but the characters as well. You see some grow from playful little kids to mature adults, while others die of natural causes. It's also like our town in the sense that there's not much of a hero's journey type structure here, but ultimately it delivers on a message about the cycle of life, as well as the many problems of the time period it's portraying. It's a 2D game with no voice acting set hundreds of years ago, and it's easily the most immersed and invested I've ever been in an interactive story. Very few problems with it, although the final couple hours don't totally stick the landing, and people did not talk like this back then. Pikmin 4 is kinda strange. It's meant to be somewhat stressful, with a timer that encourages you to exit levels at sundown and the way it uses scale, but it's actually pretty tranquil, especially without the imposing threat of a 30-day time limit. I loved unlocking new types of Pikmin and inching closer to a threshold every time I got a new treasure. It's just so simple and yet so rewarding whenever you complete a puzzle or beat one of the underground levels and find a missing astronaut. Oshi's pretty cool too. Pizza Tower is another very simple game. This one not so tranquil. It's kind of weird how the actual levels are practically impossible to lose in, and then the boss fights actually pose a moderate challenge, but there's not many inconsistencies in its level gimmicks. From the mini-golfing, to horse races, to Mort the Chicken, it's just a lot of fun. The relatively low-stakes platforming is engaging, but not difficult enough to interrupt the breakneck movement. The dialogue and characters are goofy, and overall it's the epitome of passionate but not overly ambitious indie game design. The structure of Sefue is that you start the game at age 20, and every time you die you come back to life, aged by the number of times you died. So the first time you die you'll be 21, then 23, etc, etc. Aging past 75 is game over. You don't restart from age 20 at the beginning of each of its 5 levels, rather the age you completed the last level at, and you can replay levels to ensure you get to the next level with as much life left as possible. This formula is ingenious. Since difficulty comes in the form of perfecting combat and your overall approach to completing a level, you genuinely do get better the more you play. Even though some helpful yet minor permanent upgrades and the shortcuts I unlocked from beating mini-bosses definitely helped me reach the end, I went away from this game extremely impressed and honestly a little proud of myself. Stray is one of the most stunning games of the decade. It's quite light on the puzzle solving and combat fronts, and even the platforming is largely just for show, but its jaw-dropping post-cyberpunk cities and vistas, the ambient futuristic soundscapes, and the incredible character and world design, Jesus Christ. I know Annapurna has a history of publishing some of the most technically remarkable and forward-thinking indie games out there, but this is better than what most AAA studios are capable of. Even though I spent plenty of time in my playthrough just scratching up walls and cozying up in the designated nap spots, I still feel bad for not appreciating the fine details as much as I could have, because it's such a complete and realized experience. And there's a designated meow button.
Perfect.
Street Fighter 6 has an insane campaign mode where you can initiate a fight with every NPC by walking up to them and punching them in the face. There's a lot of obvious flaws with it, but I won't lie, this pseudo-open world was more engaging for me than many real open worlds in other games. It's just really fun. But of course, the core fighting is the bulk of it, and it's an incredibly deep but also accessible system that I feel like I got pretty solid at in the many hours I put into it.
Yahoo!
One of my dream games is a Mario Metroidvania. I know that sounds incredibly brazen, but you know damn well if done right, it could be a masterpiece. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is nowhere near that level of ambition, but it is pretty fun and much better than the new Super games, and it lets Mario be an elephant, so I guess that's all you could really ask for. I'm well aware that this game is over a decade old, but I think the updated visuals and animation truly did make my appreciation for it even more potent, and I just have a lot of things I want to say about it. The Last of Us Part 1 might be considered the single greatest story-driven video game, and in spite of that, it incorporates next to none of the staple elements we've come to uniquely associate with interactive storytelling. There's no dialogue options, no alternate endings or any alternate story beats, no side missions, no character customization. It's just a linear and remarkable story that the player gets to go along for the ride with. At the same time, I think there's a good reason it works best as a video game. Don't get me wrong, I think the HBO adaptation was great, and that third episode deserves an Emmy, but the relationship between Joel and Ellie just wasn't quite there. In the game, it's these little moments that the player experiences constantly throughout the slow-burning 15-hour journey that develops their connection with each other, and also the player. It's also interesting considering its reputation as one of the greatest story-driven games given the simple plot of finding the cure to the zombie apocalypse that's carried by the most realistic and poignant dialogue in any video game ever. Although many of them are good and are going for something completely different from The Last of Us, words can't describe how fed up I am with these never-ending RPGs filled with expository dialogue and complex lore that have absolute jack shit to say to the player. Like I said, The Last of Us Part 1 has fantastic visuals and sound and other improvements from the 2013 game. And whether you've played the original on PS3, the PS4 remaster, or never played at all, I think this remake is definitely worthwhile. Maybe don't get it on PC though. Breath of the Wild used to be my favorite game of all time, and I think Tears of the Kingdom might have changed that. Not because it's my new favorite game of all time, no, it's not even close. It's just really difficult to look at Breath of the Wild, which is surpassed in so many ways in terms of the options the player is given to tackle combat and puzzle solving, and say it's the better overall experience. However, all of TOTK's ambition comes at a price. First of all, the story is a straight-up dumpster fire, but more importantly, it's a little too obtrusive for its own good. For example, some cutscenes might tell you to go somewhere you've already been because there's no intangible limitations in terms of where you can go in the world. I love the feeling of using a game's rules to go against what it's telling me to do, but sometimes it feels like you're just in the wrong place and you have to activate a certain quest line to engage the mechanic, unlike in the first game. Those moments are few and far between though, and even though I just complained about this game for a minute, it's still a masterpiece due to how stellar its good elements are, those mostly being the sandbox creation and exploration tools that are unlike anything you've ever seen before, and this approach to game design where they lifted some of the world and ideas from the first game and went absolutely rampant with them. Even though my expectations were extreme, and I'm really opposed to this being the approach for every future 3D Zelda game, it's still an excellent experience, and one of the greatest open world games of all time, trailing close behind its precursor. Anyway, this last part is unscripted. I plan on doing a bunch more reviews this year. I said that in my top 10 games of 2021, but I mean it for real this time. I'm in college now. I'm like kind of in this mindset. I'm actually going to do a bunch of reviews this year. I promise. So if you're interested in that and maybe some other video game related content, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, whatever. And yeah, thanks for watching.